I cleared my desk the same way I'd cleared every problem for them. Quietly, efficiently, without complaint. 21 years of loyalty fit into 2 cardboard boxes and a forced smile as HR thanked me for my service. No explanation. No warning. Just a resignation letter slid across the table, and a deadline attached to my dignity. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I signed, stood up, and walked out like nothing had been taken from me. They thought experience could be erased with paperwork. They thought silence meant surrender. What they forgot was that I'd built the systems they depended on. I knew where the rules bent, where they broke, and where they'd been ignored for years. I knew what was written, and what was quietly practiced. So I did exactly what they told me to do. I left. And the moment I did, the calls started. Not from them, from their lawyer, asking questions no one wants answered on record. For most of my adult life, my mornings followed the same rhythm. Coffee at 60:10, news muted on the television. The drive to the office timed so precisely I could predict which traffic light would turn red. I wasn't flashy or loud. I was reliable. The kind of employee companies say they value, but rarely protect. I joined the firm when I was 28. Back then, the office was smaller, understaffed, and held together by people willing to do more than their job titles required. I became one of those people without meaning to. When someone quit, I absorbed their work. When systems failed, I fixed them. When deadlines were tight, I stayed late. Promotions passed me by, but responsibility didn't. Management changed over the years. New faces, new slogans, the same quiet expectations. I trained managers who later became my supervisors. I wrote procedures that were still being used decades later, though my name was no longer attached to them. I didn't mind. I believed stability mattered more than recognition. The shift started slowly. Meetings I wasn't invited to. Decisions made without my input, even when they affected my department. A younger manager, new, confident, and unfamiliar with the history of anything, began asking questions that felt less like curiosity and more like audits. He smiled too much. Took notes when I spoke. At first, I assumed it was restructuring. Companies love that word. It makes disruption sound intentional. My daily life didn't change much, but the air around me did. Emails became shorter. Praise disappeared. I was copied on fewer conversations. When I asked for clarification, I was told not to worry. "We're just streamlining," they said. "You've done great work here." I should have heard the warning in that past tense. The day they called me into the conference room, I noticed the details before the message. The blinds were half closed. HR was already seated. A folder lay in the center of the table, squared neatly, as if alignment could soften what was inside. They didn't accuse me of anything. That was the strangest part. No misconduct. No poor performance. Just a vague mention of organizational fit and future direction. Then they slid the resignation letter toward me, pre-written, with a pen placed carefully on top. "This is the best option for everyone," the manager said, not meeting my eyes. 21 years condensed into a paragraph that thanked me for my dedication while erasing my presence. I read it slowly. My name looked unfamiliar on the page, like it belonged to someone else. I thought of the late nights. The emergencies handled quietly. The institutional knowledge no one had bothered to document because I was always there. I felt something tighten in my chest. But I kept my voice even. "Is this voluntary?" I asked. They exchanged a glance. HR smiled without warmth. "It's time," she said, so I signed. Not because I agreed, but because I understood what refusal would cost me. I packed my desk under polite supervision. Colleagues avoided eye contact. Some looked guilty. Others looked relieved. As I walked out of the building for the last time, the security doors closing behind me, I felt the weight of something unfinished settle in. Not anger. Awareness. Because they hadn't just let me go. They had underestimated what I carried with me. The first week after I left felt unnaturally quiet. No emails. No meetings. No urgent calls asking where a file was or how a process worked. I woke up at my usual time anyway, my body still loyal to a schedule that no longer needed me. Coffee tasted different when it wasn't rushed. Friends told me to rest, to enjoy the break. I nodded and thanked them, but rest wasn't what filled my days. Reflection did. I began replaying my last few years at the firm, not emotionally, but carefully. Patterns emerged once I stopped trying to excuse them. The new management. The rushed changes. The pressure to cut costs while expanding output. The way compliance was spoken about as a suggestion rather than a requirement. I opened my laptop and logged into my personal cloud storage. Over the years, I had developed a habit of keeping copies of my own work, templates, procedures, drafts I'd written at home during long nights. Not proprietary secrets. Just my contributions. My fingerprints. Things I was allowed to have because I'd created them. Looking at them now, I saw more than effort. I saw context. Decisions made without documentation. Shortcuts taken to meet quarterly goals. Verbal approvals that were never put in writing. I hadn't questioned them at the time, because I trusted the people above me to know the limits, but trust doesn't change the rules. My phone rang mid-morning on the 5th day. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. The message was brief, professional. A man introduced himself as legal counsel for my former employer. He said they had a few follow-up questions and hoped I'd be willing to clarify some procedures. I didn't call back right away. Instead, I reviewed my separation agreement, every clause, every line, what I was allowed to say, what I wasn't obligated to explain. Silence, I realized, was not only permitted, it was powerful. The calls continued. Once a day at first, then twice. Always polite, always vague. They never asked directly for help. But the implication was clear. Something wasn't adding up. Systems I'd maintained were no longer running as smoothly. Questions were being asked internally, and no one left behind could answer them confidently. I went about my days calmly, updated my RA summary, took walks in the afternoon, organized files I'd neglected for years. And in the background, I listened to the voicemails stack up. One message stood out. The lawyer mentioned an upcoming review. External. He didn't use the word audit, but he didn't have to. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in months. I wasn't plotting anything. I wasn't leaking information or making threats. I was simply allowing absence to reveal the truth of my role. They had wanted me gone, believing my value ended when my access did. They were wrong. A week later, an email arrived, formal, careful. They were requesting a meeting, paid, of course, to ensure continuity. I stared at the screen for a long moment before closing the laptop. Continuity, I thought, had a price. And for the first time, I would be the one setting it. I agreed to the meeting on my terms. Neutral location, written agenda, compensation discussed in advance. The lawyer responded within minutes, relief barely disguised beneath professional language. We settled on a short-term consulting arrangement, narrowly defined. I made sure every boundary was clear before I ever stepped into a room with them again. Walking into that conference room felt different this time. No security badge, no assigned seat, just me, a notebook, and a calm I hadn't felt in years. The manager who'd avoided my eyes during my resignation now greeted me with forced enthusiasm. HR wasn't there. Instead, two executives I barely recognized sat stiffly beside the lawyer. They asked questions carefully, circling issues without naming them directly. I answered only what was asked. No more. No less. When I didn't know something offhand, I told them I'd need to review my notes. Off the clock. Billable time. I could feel the shift as the meeting went on. The realization settling in that removing me hadn't simplified anything. It had exposed gaps they didn't know how to explain. Processes that worked because I was there, not because they were well designed. Decisions that had relied on my judgment without ever acknowledging it. At one point, the lawyer paused and asked, "Were you aware this wasn't documented?" "Yes," I said evenly. I raised it more than once. Silence followed. Not uncomfortable. Informative. They ended the meeting sooner than planned. As I packed my bag, the manager cleared his throat. "We may need additional support," he said. "I'm available," I replied, already standing. Under the same terms. Outside, the air felt lighter. I wasn't reclaiming my job. I didn't want it back. What I was reclaiming was accuracy, my role, my contributions, my choice to engage or not. The calls became more frequent after that, more urgent. Each one confirmed what I'd already understood: my absence had consequences they hadn't prepared for. And every interaction was documented now, on both sides.